Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's transferable and then help you exit successfully on your own terms and your own conditions. And if you're like most of our clients, you've heard of professional employer organizations or PEOs. But like most of our clients, you might remain unclear on how a PEO actually works, how you and your benefit or your business would benefit from a PEO, and whether or not it would be a wise move for you and a cost-effective strategy for your business. And so our goal for today, this conversation, is to provide some clarity around all these issues so that you can be better informed and equipped to make a confident decision regarding your business and whether or not a PEO would make sense. And our guest is Andy Schuman. As a business advisor with Insperity, Andy consults with small business owners on a strategic approach to run more efficiently, accelerate growth, and increase profitability with the use of a PEO. And for the past 19 years, Andy's been a trusted advisor to small business owners throughout the country, helping them decide whether or not a PEO is going to make sense for their situation. We recently introduced Andy to a client of ours in Georgia, and he was fantastic, very helpful, asked the right questions. It was clear that he knew what he was talking about, but also that he really wanted to help the client know and decide whether or not a PEO was going to be a good fit for their business. So he knows his stuff, and he's truly an advisor, and so it's going to be great to have him with us. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Pat and Walter. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I think Walter's got a question for you right here out the gate.
Hey, Andy. So good seeing you again. I'm just going to ask the obvious question that a lot of our listeners are probably wondering. What exactly is a PEO?
Sure. So a PEO, which as Pat alluded to, stands for Professional Employer Organization, is basically a large company that shares in the status of the employer of record with small and mid-sized businesses. The triggering effect for that is the PEO uses their federal tax ID number to submit payroll taxes on behalf of their client companies. And by doing so, it opens up those small, mid-sized businesses to a significant amount of different resources that larger companies have that smaller companies typically don't have, to be able to help them become more profitable, contain costs, protect the business from compliance, and a lot of other advantages that I'm happy to go into as much detail as you'd like. But it's a great business model for small, mid-sized businesses that are experiencing growth. A lot of it's related to HR support and expertise, where as you grow and hire more people, typically you need more HR support within your business. But let's face it, for small, mid-sized businesses, their HR budget is usually pretty lean. So to be able to outsource that from a personnel standpoint, as well as offloading risk and compliance and gaining a lot of these different services that bigger companies have, really helps those businesses grow. And also, if they're in hiring mode, levels the playing field so that they can better compete with larger companies for talent.
Yeah, so Andy, we're aware there's some really, really compelling and good reasons for, and you just mentioned a few of them in your summary there, opening summary statement. Some really good and compelling reasons as to why an owner should consider a PEO. There are also some reasons where it's not always a good fit or the right thing to do. But let's start out with the reasons. Let's list some reasons that some of those compelling reasons where an owner uh, it might want to move in this direction. Let's start with this one because this was compelling to me. Um, Compliance and risk management, particularly in light of the work that we're doing in helping owners prepare for exit. And then there's that, if they're going to sell to a third party, there's always that due diligence um, um, thing hanging out there that they need to prepare for. And so I know compliance and risk management is going to be a part of that due diligence process, and PEOs can be very helpful with that. So let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that PEO relationship, as I described, it's what another term is co-employment, where the PEO and the client company are both employers of the business. And for the PEO side, when it comes to risk and compliance, what that means is the PEO becomes the employer of record for compliance, not the client company, meaning that the PEO's job is to ensure that their clients maintain compliance wherever they have employees, because there's a liability shift there where that risk and liability falls now on the PEO rather than the client company. So I run into a lot of companies, especially post-COVID, who have employees in a lot of different states, and it's next to impossible to keep up to date with all these different compliance laws and regulations in many different states for a smaller business. And so that liability gets 100% shifted off the shoulders of that company and onto the PEO. So they don't have to worry about making sure they're compliant in each state that they have employees, because that liability and responsibility gets delegated to the PEO. So that's one of the many things that they don't have to worry about. And if they're trying to sell their business, and to your point, Pat, the due diligence process, there are many occurrences where when that process is going on and it's determined that they're with the PEO, that process gets cleared, because once it's recognized that they're with a PEO, then that means that, okay, we don't have to worry about compliance and employer liability, because that's not on them, that's on the PEO. So we know that that's clear and that's all good. Let's move on to the next point of due diligence.
That's a really, the state taxation is really a good point, Andy, because these, like you said, especially post-COVID, a lot of my clients have employees in all, ton of different states. Every state has different rules. Every state has little additional taxes. You just look at DC, a couple of years ago, they added that special tax for, I forget what it was for, dependent care or something. Then they added before that, they added a tax where if you're providing a parking benefit to employees, you have a surtax you got to pay. There's no way people can keep up with that stuff on their own. It's crazy.
Yep.
And
It's
every
impossible.
state's the same way.
Yep. And then I run into one of the questions I'll ask when I'm talking to a new potential client is, what state do you have employees in? And I'll then specifically ask about California, because California is known for having the toughest employer-related compliance laws in the country. And a lot of times the business owner will laugh when I ask and say, no way, I don't want to touch having employees in California. Right. And that kind of goes into a conversation. Well, now if there's a good, business opportunity or opportunity to hire someone in California, that hesitation totally gets thrown away, because now they can hire, in any state, whether it's California or any other new state, without that concern.
Yeah. So the other benefit I've always seen is the ability to participate in much more robust retirement plans. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So PEOs have a group retirement health plan, and what that means is a few things. It means they're able to pool thousands of different companies together when it comes to offering a retirement plan, so you feel like you have a 401k plan similar to what you would have if you worked at a Fortune 500 company, and the costs are traditionally going to be less expensive than they otherwise would be. And the other advantage with that too is that because you're on a PEO platform, just like everything else from the employer perspective, the PEO is responsible for the administration and compliance of that 401k plan. They file the 5,500 reports, which are the required end of year reports to administer a 401k plan, and all the other administrative responsibilities. So there's a lot of advantages in the 401k side in utilizing a PEO for that as well. Healthcare and benefits for the employees is another big one that works relatively similar to how I described the 401k piece.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more? First off, let me just say that personally, I think the compliance and risk management piece that we just talked about a second ago is reason enough to at least take a look at a PEO for your situation to see if it's going to make sense across the board. But that's a big one, particularly if you are, planning to sell to a third party eventually, and when you have due diligence in mind and all that. But then, there's cost savings, or there can be, and in regard to economies of scale, and health insurance is a big piece of that, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and back to your point real quick on the compliance piece and the risk mitigation piece. So we poll our clients on what are the top 3 reasons that you decided to work with a PEO. And the number one reason was setting their mind at ease and alleviating the stress of, are we compliant? What laws have changed? Making sure that their employer-related risks are under control. And so that's the number one reason from our polls that small business owners decide to work with a PEO, because they have enough stresses as it is being a small business owner, right? So if they can just take that one, which is a big stress, off their plate, and now instead of 8 stresses, they're down to 7, that's a big important peace of mind for small business owners to be able to offload that. And most don't realize that there's a way to offload the risk and liability of having employees. The same, not only with compliance, but also employment litigation claims. And the PEO becomes the employer of record for that too. So if a company that's in the PEO relationship gets sued by an employee or a past employee, the PEO is named on that lawsuit with them, and they have the resources to help handle that as well. So anything risk outsourcing is really kind of my mind, part of the big picture and how a PEO works with small businesses. They're able to outsource pretty much the majority of the risk that they currently have in having employees, which, to your point, alone is at least a reason to engage and think about working with a PEO. Back to the topic on economies of scale. So healthcare, probably the biggest line item for having employees outside of salary, right? And so a big piece to that is leveraging a PEO's economies of scale to be able to reduce their current spend in employee benefits and healthcare. How PEOs are able to do that is typical PEO will have thousands of clients and hundreds of thousands of worksite employees when you count how many employees work for their clients. And they're able to aggregate those hundreds of thousands of employees to be able to combine buying power directly through employee benefits. And so when you think about it, if you're a smaller company, say you have 30 to 50 employees, just using that as an example, whatever the case may be, or even less than that, your buying power is pretty much zero when it comes to buying employee benefits. And truth be told, brokers don't really want to work with small businesses. That's not where they make their money. They'll do it because they kind of have to, but they're not excited about working with small businesses when it comes to providing employee benefits, because truthfully, that's just not where brokers make their money. They make it with larger companies. And so our ability to, as a PEO, to aggregate all of these businesses and all of their employees creates this massive buying power, which will ensure that those healthcare costs are lower than they would otherwise be in a brokered environment. And then it's up to the business as far as what they want to do with that healthcare and employee benefit savings. Do they want to reinvest it in providing their employees with better benefits? Do they want to put it back in the company? Do they want to do more of a share where part of the savings goes to the company, part of the savings goes to the employees for the same plan? So, every company is different in how they want to utilize that when it comes to the economies of scale. But the three big things I say, kind of like the highest level overview on the advantages of working with a PEO. Number one, as we discussed, risk mitigation. Number two, economies of scale to really provide the resources that smaller companies typically don't have to attract and retain talent. So if you're a business owner and you're hiring employees and you're scaling and you're trying to find that competitive advantage, working with a PEO to be able to have those employee resources that typically bigger companies have is a great way to attract and retain talent. My wife's a recruiter, and all day long I hear most of the companies she recruits for are small businesses, and she tells me the biggest challenge that she has as a recruiter is talking with candidates who are either coming from a larger company, so they're used to a certain level of infrastructure and employee resources and benefits, and they want to have, similar, at their new job, or it's a candidate that's also interviewing with a bigger company that can provide those sorts of resources. So to be able to have that small business feel and family feel and an environment that a lot of people love and culture, but still being able to provide the employees with the big company resources and benefits is a great combination. And then the third is HR. A lot of our PEO clients turn to us for help in increased support when it comes to HR. And it really depends on where the company's at, both from a growth perspective as well as from where their in-house HR staff is currently positioned. I run into an equal amount of clients that use PEOs who either don't have an internal HR person and it's currently the CFO doing it, or they have a operations manager who's kind of like a jack of all trades but doesn't have an HR background. But then on the flip side, talk to a lot of companies that have one or two internal HR people, but with their growth projections and how fast they're growing and how many employees they have, they really should have probably at least one more in-house HR person than they do. But the HR budgets for hiring additional staff tend to be lean at that size of company. So they engage with a PEO because they recognize that they need more HR support, but they don't want to pay an additional salary and overhead to hire an additional person. And that can mean a lot of things. From an HR standpoint, if it's a company that has more of like a junior level HR person as their only HR person, like an HR generalist, for example, that person doesn't really have the tenure and experience to work strategically on the high level strategic parts of HR and human capital. So where a PEO would come in that role is to really help provide kind of like a director or VP type HR level of focus to really work on the strategic parts of HR. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if it's a company that has a director of HR or a VP of HR, or in some cases a chief people officer, that individual wants to only focus on strategic HR and building the company culture and getting the most production out of the employees and making them happy and making them a great place to work. They don't want to be distracted by the administrative parts of HR and compliance. And so in those scenarios, we'll step in as the PEO and really offload all of the administrative work so that higher level, senior level HR person can focus solely on the strategic HR that they want to work on, and that as a senior HR person they should really be focusing on, and not let the administrative parts of HR bog them down and take away their time. And the last thing I'll talk about from the HR perspective is a lot of small businesses, when they are hiring an HR person, there's a good amount of times that they're hiring someone who currently at the time worked for a larger company and is probably getting an elevated role. Like an example would be someone who's an HR manager at a large company and then gets hired as director or VP of HR for a smaller company. They're going because they get an elevated role, which they wouldn't otherwise have at that larger company. That person who was an HR manager at a bigger company and is now a director or VP of HR at a smaller company is used to more HR support than just themselves. And so I've found in speaking with those individuals, it's a breath of fresh air that they have this toolbox of HR resources and services at their disposal that they're accustomed to having, when they were at that bigger company, but they wouldn't ordinarily have at that smaller company. And also HR people like to talk to other HR people, right? It can be lonely if you're a department of one. So to be able to have access with the PEO to other HR professionals to bounce HR related conversations and ideas off of is really helpful to those individuals. So a lot to unpack as far as HR goes, but really risk mitigation, additional HR support, leveraging resources to be as attractive an employer as possible. In my mind, are the three big items as why a small business would want to engage with a PEO.
Hey, Andy, I've been kind of surprised that I've got a number of clients who work with Insperity, and they kind of range in size. I guess before knowing anything about you guys, my initial thought was, okay, well, this is like a stepping stone when you're just getting big enough that you need HR, but you're not big enough where you're doing it internally. But I've got some really big clients who use you guys.
Yeah. So to your point, my personal client base at Insperity, and as a company, it's very diverse in size and where the business is at. My smallest client is 5 employees, which is our minimum threshold. And that those companies are typically just starting out and need the basic HR infrastructure, of HR support, payroll, benefits, more of just the HR structure to get things going and started and not have to obviously worry about compliance, but more of the tactical HR support rather than the strategic because they're just starting out and they're so small. My largest client is 200 employees. And then I'd say personally, my average size client is probably around 50-ish, which is pretty standard for our company. And so the needs are very diverse depending on the company. Kind of, again, it really comes down to, the HR staff and what they currently have, like I was describing before, Walter, which is very, very diverse. I have clients who are, the 200-person client has a chief people officer and then an HR generalist. And so how they use Insperity from an HR support standpoint is very different than the 30-person company I have who has an HR manager as their only HR person versus a 5-person startup. So to your point, yeah, it's very diverse range of clients in terms of size and HR staff. And we really meet our clients where they are when it comes to what their HR needs, and we customize our approach based on that. We'll have a month into the start of the client relationship, we'll have a strategic HR meeting with our clients to really dig into what their internal HR staff looks like, what their HR needs are, what projects we can work on, what priorities they have, so that we can get the ball rolling and really help them out. But to your point, there is a preconceived notion, I think, that in some cases, PEOs are really meant for startups and really small businesses, where I've found we actually probably add more value as those small businesses are scaling and growing. Because when you think about it, as you hire more employees, your compliance risks get greater because you're having more people, and chances are you're going to have more people in different states as you hire more people. So your compliance needs are greater, as you have more employees. And then there's a more likelihood of you getting sued if you have more employees, power by numbers. So the risk mitigation piece, tends to be more advantageous as you have more employees. HR support, as you hire more employees, as they say, more people, more problems. As you hire more people, more important than versus when you're tiny to have that additional HR support. And then employee benefits, if you're scaling and hiring a bunch of people, you want to be able to be as competitive as possible to attract that talent. So when you think about it, yes, PEOs are focused on smaller businesses, but there's a wide range of what a small business looks like. Our definition of a small business is pretty wide. I'd say it's between 5 to 500 employees, which I think 500 employees is the definition of a small business by SBA, which is obviously a very wide range. A 5-person company is significantly different than a 500-person company. But foundationally, we tailor our PEO services so that it could fit for both size companies in a very customized, specific type of way based on what their needs are.
Andy, okay, good. So let's wrap up with when is it not a good fit? You've given it fantastic, compelling reasons for why it could be and should be considered risk mitigation, economies of scale, cost savings, HR support, and expertise. When is it not a good fit, or when should an owner decide not to go in this direction?
Yeah. So I would say most of the time, it is a really good fit, but I would say the times to identify not a good fit is probably if you're scaling downwards in staff and not upwards. If from a and it depends state by state. It's tough to describe because there are different laws in different states. But I'll give you an example for us in Maryland, for example, versus Virginia, which is very different. Because a PEO takes on the workers' comp risk and claims, depending on the state a company's employees are, they have to do their due diligence to make sure that they'd be bringing on less risky business because the PEO would be the responsible party for workers' comp claims moving forward. If the employees are in Maryland, the PEO can carve out workers' comp, meaning that they can bring on higher risk businesses that have a higher workers' comp claim history. But if they have employees in Virginia, there's a law that state the PEOs can't carve it out. So that's an example, but again, that's very state specific. So if you're in a certain state, it might be fine and good. If you're in another state, it might not. A lot of those examples are really state specific because different states have different laws. But I would say that, but again, that would be tough for a business owner to identify themselves. They would need to, talk to a PEO to understand like if that's something based on the state that they have employees in, if they can do or not. I would say that's the biggest thing. And then also from a healthcare standpoint, PEOs can carve out healthcare and provide all of the other services that I described, the compliance and risk mitigation and the HR support without healthcare. But one of the things that I run into that I think is a misconception that's a good messaging point to small businesses. Don't engage with a PEO if you're just coming off a big increase in healthcare. I think a lot of business owners who get a big increase in healthcare, unfortunately, because of large claims, they're desperate to try to figure out a way to manage that moving forward. And I get a decent amount of outreach from business owners who are in a jam because they just experienced a huge increase in healthcare and they're looking for a way really just to combat that. And in those scenarios, a PEO, Insperity, for example, would not, take on a business that's currently experiencing a significant increase in healthcare if that's their motivation to use a PEO, because that would be bad business. Like how I described with the workers' comp example, that would be bad business for the PEO to bring on a company that has a current track record of big increases in healthcare, and that's really their motivation to go with the PEO, because the chances are the PEO is going to say no thank you.
Andy, this has been great. I mean, I think I've finally really appreciate the potential benefits of a PEO. So thanks for laying it all out for us. I think our listeners learned a lot as well. So let me ask you two final questions. Is there anything you'd like to promote today, and how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Sure. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. So, like I said, so I specifically work for Insperity, as Pat and Walter were alluding to. We actually created the PEO industry. So, our founder and CEO, Paul Savardi, who's still our CEO, as active as ever 38 years later from when he started the company, created the PEO when he created Insperity. Insperity is the first PEO. Many have followed suit after. And so founder of the PEO industry. So, no better hands than working with the PEO that created the industry. And we're rated as the top PEO for small businesses for a particular reason. I love what I do. I've been doing it for a long time, and I just really enjoy working with entrepreneurs and small businesses to, help them out as best I can in the position I'm in. My dad was a small business owner, so that passion to help other small business owners has rubbed off on me through my dad. I'm in the DC metro area. I can work with companies throughout the country, as I currently do. I have clients throughout the country for sure. Best way to reach me is by email, which is andy.schuman@Insperity, INSPERITY.com. You could also call my office, 703-821-7320.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Andy. Great seeing you.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Pat at 301-859-0860. You can reach me at 301-951-9090. If you've benefited from today's episode, please consider liking and sharing it on social media. And as always, thanks for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Walter Dial and Pat Ennis signing off.